Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we are tackling something that I think is going to surprise a lot of viewers, particularly those of you who are familiar with my channel and a lot of the topics that I cover. Gen Z is increasingly becoming conservative. I know. I know. The generation known for TikTok dances and climate change activism is showing a surprising shift toward traditional values. And it's especially surprising to me considering how deep rooted we know that progressive indoctrination has become as part of the entire education system. And left wing propaganda has replaced pretty much everything that we used to call journalism. So I think that we all just assumed that since the odds are clearly against them, that there was no hope in expecting the next generation of young people to get this country back on track to something that even remotely resembles sanity, and to also prevent us from continuing down the downward spiral that liberals are determined to keep us on. So we're going to get into all of this, what's happening, what's driving the shift. But before we do, please hit the thumbs up button on this video and subscribe to my channel. I am trying to grow this channel, and I do appreciate you so much for doing both of those things. It helps a lot. So let's start with the facts. Gen Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012, has been stereotyped as the most progressive generation yet. Think Me Too, climate activism, and all things rainbow flags. But recent data is flipping the script. According to a Newsweek article from March 2025, Democratic pollster David Shore was shocked at this shift, saying, quote, "Young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers to becoming potentially the most conservative generation that we've experienced maybe in 50 to 60 years. I'd say that's quite the plot twist. And it's not just talk. In the 2024 election, AP Votecast found that President Trump won 47% of voters aged 18 to 29, up from 36% in 2020. It goes without saying that is a huge jump. But here's where it gets a little spicy. So this shift is super gendered. Young men are definitely leading this charge. A Yale Youth poll from April 2025 showed voters aged 18 to 21 lean Republican by 11.7 points for the 2026 midterms. Meanwhile, young women are still mostly team blue. Let's break down why Gen Z, especially guys, are vibing with conservative values. First up, as we have all heard of, the manosphere. If you've been on TikTok or YouTube, you've probably seen a growing number of male influencers preaching traditional masculinity. Think discipline, faith, and family. We've got Jordan Peterson, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, and even independent-leaning podcaster Joe Rogan.
You give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms, in the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning, this thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. Gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful, who are among the most protected and privileged people that the world has ever produced. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works, and that's not toxic masculinity, that appalling phrase. It's what keeps the world going round.
I definitely say that these male influencers are hitting a nerve. Gen Z guys are growing up in a world where they feel the economic pressure, the dating struggles, and a sense that society has left them behind, all while still being expected to do everything that Jordan Peterson just listed, while being repeatedly blamed for all of society's problems, especially by women. And the media and public education like to fuel this hostility toward men by claiming that they're not smart enough to understand the issues that matter, or they're just being manipulated by the manosphere. But what they intentionally fail to recognize is that men are not as easy to manipulate as women are, because they are not led by their emotions, which is why more women are still Democrats. Men go off of what is happening right in front of them. Can they get a job? Can they buy a house? Can they support a family? Can they pay their bills? Is their community safe? And the answer to those questions matter. I love this post by Mario Knopfel. It says, Gen Z men are drifting right, and they're not apologizing. Although leftists say they aren't smart or are being manipulated, that's not the case. They just don't buy what the establishment's selling. COVID hit them hard, and politics hasn't offered much since. More 18 to 24-year-old men now identify as conservative than liberal, a reversal from even a few years ago. It's not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's what happens when no one earns their trust. That's not to say that these social issues do not matter to them. I will say I think men have a better ability at times to prioritize the things that actually create a stable society so that all of these other things can be addressed. I really appreciated Brett Cooper's take on this.
Trump is in this new conservative party, and MAGA is, the raging against the machine. And young people are rebellious and they're willing to try something new. And so I think when they realized that the Democrats were becoming increasingly establishment, when they realized they didn't even get to choose their own candidate.
A lot of people think that the younger generation likes the progressive movement because it might be cooler to be progressive and inclusive of everybody. What are you finding?
I think that Gen Z still has those viewpoints. I think that Gen Z in general is still more progressive than other generations, but I think we've realized that that's not the end all be all. Like being inclusive, being empathetic, being a good person does not make our economy better. Being overly loving and tolerant and bending and changing our entire society for a small minority of people, a small fraction of people in these, intersectional communities, that is not going to make our lives better. And I think that they have been taunted and jeered at and been told that they are inherently racist or inherently homophobic for, making a joke. I think that they finally just snapped and they said, this isn't creating any tangible change for my future.
To me, that makes sense. You can care about all of these other things, but you cannot move the needle on anything in whatever matters to you if the foundation of the world that you live in is completely falling apart. If people can't work, if they can't afford groceries, gas to pay their bills, they can't afford food, and people aren't having families and raising kids in good homes. So it is an interesting mix of values when you do have a lot of Gen Z who still believe in things like climate change and who still want to see rainbow flags everywhere, but they also recognize that yelling and screaming over those things does not put food on the table, and it doesn't make our streets safer or cleaner or our country more secure. And economic anxiety is definitely huge. Gen Z was born into a post-recession world with skyrocketing costs and shaky job markets. A Newsweek article from September 2024 quotes researcher Zach Karnowski saying, they probably feel like the world has been moving pretty quickly. There may just be a desire for stability. Conservatism, with its focus on tradition and order, feels like a safe bet for some. So how are people reacting to Gen Z's supposed conservative streak? Well, as you can imagine, it is a mixed bag. On the left, there is straight up panic. Jesse Waters talked about New York Times columnist Ezra Klein, as Klein warned Democrats that they grossly overestimated their popularity with young voters. And now Democrats are scrambling to figure out how they can win back favor, particularly among young men, without alienating their progressive base.
Democrats lost two big bets: that they'd always win the youth vote, and when the country got less white, Republicans would be finished. And they were dead wrong on both. And now their coalition's crippled. Ezra Klein, a big-time liberal thinker, says with the way the party's heading and with the number of Democrats moving out of blue states, Democrats could be out of power for the next 15 years. Everyone's moving to red states. It's boosting Republicans' electoral votes. So the Democrats could sweep the Rust Belt and still not hit 270. They lost the working class, and all their leaders aged out. A new poll asked Democrats who best reflects the core values of their party, and AOC came in first place. Wow.
So I'd say if AOC is their best bet right now, they're not on a great path to winning back male voters. I mean, as we know, for women, all they have to do is scream about abortion around election time, and many women will just go down with the party. But young men, as I said, are not as easy to manipulate because they tend to demand a more comprehensive view on how everything affects society, not just one small fraction of the population. That, and as natural protectors, they're not so much about the lie that allowing grown men in dresses to entertain children makes you an empathetic person, or that kids need exposure to sexually graphic material when they're young to learn to be kind. The reactions on X have been mixed as well. There are people that are cheering, saying that Gen Z men are waking up to the truth, that liberalism has failed them and it is time for tradition, while others are a little bit more skeptical, saying that it's just a loud minority that has been amplified by algorithms. There was a person that said Gen Z really isn't conservative, they're just mad at the system. Wait till they see the GOP policies. And then there was this interview done on a college campus.
As just our culture moves into things that are maybe darker and more immoral, I think people are looking for some moral ground.
Just the mess that the left side is, I think it's good to see more moral and Christian standards.
As far as Gen Z as a whole, I feel like it's definitely because the left has gone so far left.
Christians, wherever they are, should be obeying Jesus and doing the Great Commission. So if God's changing people's minds, it will materialize in politics as well.
All the mental health things and everything, making people realize that there has to be some kind of hope.
I've seen arguments all over the internet about what's true and what's not. Jesus is the truth. He's always been the truth.
As we've reached the hegemony of classical liberalism, we've started to realize that it's not the most sustainable ideology.
Even on a scientific basis, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The pendulum of postmodernism has swung. The reaction of orthodoxy has crept into the modern era.
And I think a lot of these responses just demonstrate that as people, we do want lines, we do want boundaries, and we do want some kind of universal understanding of right and wrong that we can all agree on, regardless of politics. And the left has heavily pushed society to where they think the only lines that we should draw are in front of people who want to stop immoral behavior, saying that anybody who wants to stop you from doing whatever it is that you want to do is the problem and they're just trying to oppress you, while pretending that the harm that this causes is fine because it comes from that person's personal choice. As the one guy said, it's not a sustainable ideology, and we can only go so far before people who have souls, who have hearts, who have real compassion and empathy throw their hands up and say, that's too far. We have to put a stop to these things just because they're wrong. But let's take a second and zoom back out again and ask the question, is Gen Z really becoming more conservative than past generations? It's hard to tell because, as we've already gone over, it is a very gendered issue. Data from PRRI shows Gen Z women are still way more liberal. 47% identify as liberal versus 24% conservative. So I think when we do talk about this issue, we do have to acknowledge that there is far more of a gender split than a full-on red wave. But we can acknowledge that the shift among young men is real and it is shaking up politics. And if Democrats don't adapt, they could lose, and we hope they lose big in 2026 and beyond. And if Republicans play their cards right, let's pray that they do, they might lock in a new base. Unfortunately, while young men are listening to guys like Charlie Kirk and Jordan Peterson, women are still being bombarded with as much hostility and this refusal to communicate as possible.
With this idea that gets floated a lot in politics that we need to sit down and talk to the other side, right? Like, do I really have to sit down and say, this is why I think dictatorships are bad, and get out history books? Are we there? And it just seems like the burden of this always falls on the left to go sit down with the dipshits and have regressive conversations. And I think we all have to draw boundaries and say, we're not talking to stupid. And you can hear them all say, oh, look, you're talking down to them. And I would say, you're goddamn right we are.
And unfortunately, women like this hostile individual have very large audiences, and a lot of young women are eating this garbage up. But women like myself and other female content creators, we're doing what we can to get this next generation of young women to listen and to not look at the world with so much venom and hostility as that last woman clearly does. I am trying to help, guys. I really am. But that is all I have for you in this one. What do you guys think? Is Gen Z becoming more conservative, or is this just a phase? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you never miss a video. Other than that, keep it real, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.